In an effort to determine the vulnerability of coastal installations, BW attack from offshore, tests were held recently at a large air base. The site selected was ideally suited to a test of this nature. Located on the coast, this vital military installation is bordered by water on two sides. Two men, ostensibly on a fishing trip, arranged to rent a small outboard motorboat. After receiving instructions in operating the boat, the fishermen cast off. Once out of sight of the pier, they made for an isolated spot on the shore. Here, a disseminating device filled with a harmless BW agent was put aboard. The disseminating device and its power source were concealed under a tarpaulin. Then the men began an apparently aimless cruise up the bayou toward the air base. With weather conditions favorable, the men began to spray the dry simulant agent across the path of a gentle wind blowing toward the air base. Spraying was continuous while the boat traveled a distance of 1.5 miles. In the immediate vicinity of the boat, the cloud of biological organisms could not be distinguished from the exhaust smoke of the motor, and it rapidly became invisible as it drifted downwind. The wind of about 3 to 6 miles per hour carried the cloud of simulant agent over most of the operations area, administrative area, and base housing, and continued in high concentration several miles beyond. At no time during the operation were the men challenged, questioned, or even suspected of being other than fishermen. Certainly there was no outward indication that the air base was the target of a biological warfare attack. Had this been an actual attack with an infectious agent, a tremendous patient load would have been imposed on the medical facilities. The operations of the base would have been seriously hampered, or possibly even completely disrupted. In another test, a similar type of disseminating device, loaded with simulant agent, was fitted into the luggage compartment of an automobile and connected to the exhaust pipe of the car. The operating controls of the unit were placed on the front seat so that the driver could easily start and stop the dissemination and vary the rate of output to suit the speed of the car. Driven along a public road upwind of the air base, the vehicle appeared no different from any other car with a slightly smoky exhaust. No one paid any attention to the car, the driver, or to the exhaust, which in fact was a BW aerosol drifting toward the air base. Applying the results of this test to a large, densely populated city such as Washington, the tremendous casualty-producing potential of biological warfare becomes frightening. And it would be so easy to contaminate the air with infectious organisms. These disseminating devices were merely jury-rigged affairs, easily duplicated with parts obtainable in any city. At the U.S. Army Chemical Corps Proving Ground, tests were conducted using an F-100 aircraft equipped with an experimental spray device developed by one of the large aviation companies. One purpose of these tests was to establish the feasibility of producing BW aerosols in the most effective particle size range as a low-level line source from high-speed aircraft. Wind tunnel tests had shown that effective aerosols could be produced by discharging the BW agent into a high-velocity airstream. To confirm the wind tunnel test data, an aerial mission was conducted using a BW incapacitating agent. Flying at subsonic speed, the F-100 disseminated the liquid agent along a 15-mile line upwind of the test grid. Data from these tests were used to determine the effective coverage that could be expected with an operational type spray system employing the basic principles of the experimental device. This study showed that one fighter aircraft flying on the deck and dispensing 2 wing tanks of a liquid BW agent would cause infection in more than 50% of the populace in an area 125 miles long by 30 miles deep. 3 large aircraft could release sufficient agent to infect over 50% of the people in an area equivalent to a belt 140 miles wide, extending from New York to Chicago, comparable to the total area of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. Volunteers and test animals were exposed in the field to a mildly incapacitating BW agent. Aerosol generators were located on a line several thousand feet upwind from the groups of men and animals. When preparations were complete, the generators were fired. Even though the volunteers could not see, taste, or smell the aerosol as it drifted by, they later developed symptoms typical of the disease as a result of inhaling the infectious organisms. As each subject developed the characteristic fever, therapy was instituted. All responded to treatment and recovered completely. This laboratory test demonstrates the casualty effect of a non-persistent nerve gas developed by the United States Army Chemical Warfare Laboratories. A healthy rabbit is placed in a sealed chamber containing a small amount of the toxic gas. The clock timer on the wall indicates the number of seconds the animal has been exposed to the gas. The chemical agent rapidly begins to take effect, and in 55 seconds, the animal is incapacitated. The amount of gas used in this test was equivalent to only 1 drop of the chemical in liquid form. The chemical acts on the nervous system and causes respiratory failure. Death occurred after the animal had been exposed to the gas for 2 minutes and 15 seconds. In the field, goats have been exposed to concentrations of the agent from a gas-filled artillery shell. The test animals were placed in a trench to protect them from the fragmentation and blast effects of the artillery round. One of the goats had been fitted with a protective mask. A 155 millimeter howitzer mounted on a tower was aimed at the center of the circular target area. After the howitzer had been loaded and test personnel had retreated to a safe distance, the weapon was fired by remote control. 1 minute after the shell exploded, the animals were incapacitated by the effects of the gas. Some of the animals were dead after 5 minutes, and within 15 minutes, all had expired except the goat having the mask. Similar field tests were made with animals placed inside a tank. Here again, one of the goats was protected with a mask. In contrast to the earlier test, a gas shell of small caliber was used, and the amount of agent released was, of course, much less. 5 minutes after the shell detonated against the tank, the unmasked animals were dead from the effects of the gas. This test is an example of how toxic gas can be used to penetrate enclosed places and attack personnel protected in hard targets. The destructive action of the nerve gases can be illustrated by a few simple sketches. This represents a normal nerve ending, and this, a normal muscle. The transmission of an impulse from the nerve ending to the muscle involves the liberation of tiny quantities of a chemical called acetylcholine, which triggers a muscle action. After a nerve-directed muscle contraction, the enzyme cholinesterase almost immediately inactivates the acetylcholine, permitting the muscle to relax again, and thus the muscle action is terminated. Nerve gases knock out cholinesterase, allowing an excess of acetylcholine to accumulate. As a result, the stimulation to muscle action by acetylcholine becomes uncontrolled, and the neutralizing or relaxing effect of cholinesterase becomes less and less, depending upon the severity of the nerve gas exposure. The drug atropine, long used in medicine as a pre-anesthetic agent, can block the effects of accumulated acetylcholine and thereby help to control muscle stimulation. Thus, atropine can prevent the destructive action of nerve gases. The psychochemicals, or K agents, being developed by the Chemical Corps, comprise a new family of incapacitating agents. These non-lethal chemicals have an astonishing capacity to cause abnormal behavior in man and animals. In laboratory experiments, a normal cat displays the typical hunter instinct toward a mouse. A minute quantity of lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, is administered in aerosol form. This chemical begins to react on the brain, and after 45 seconds, the effects of the psychochemical become apparent. The cat is no longer interested in catching the mouse, and in fact appears to be afraid of it. Just a small quantity of LSD is sufficient to upset the normal physical and emotional behavior pattern. To observe the effects of the psychochemical on humans, enlisted volunteers were asked to take part in a carefully controlled test. Prior to the test, the men behaved in a well-disciplined manner, responding promptly to commands and executing movements with precision. During a break, each of the volunteers, except the drill sergeant, received a minute dose of the psychochemical in coffee, and about 30 minutes later, the squad was ordered to fall in. Now the response of the men is entirely different. They have ceased to be alert, but have become relaxed and carefree. They cannot control the impulse to laugh, and they no longer behave like well-disciplined troops. The drill sergeant has not received any of the psychochemical, and he issues commands as before. But the response of the men is sluggish, and their movements ragged. They have become confused, irrational, and uncontrollable. Seeing the effects of this chemical compound, it is not difficult to imagine the havoc that could be created among weapons crews and command headquarters in time of war. In the continuing search for incapacitating agents, the chemical warfare laboratories are investigating a great many chemical compounds. One of these, CS4640, is of particular interest as a potential incapacitator. A very small amount of this compound produces partial paralysis in laboratory animals. The amount required is indicated in this comparison with an ordinary aspirin tablet. The two dogs to be used in this test have been exposed to effective doses of the chemical in previous tests and have always recovered completely. A dilute solution of CS4640 is prepared for use in creating an aerosol of the chemical in an exposure chamber. Although exposure to the aerosol for about 30 seconds is sufficient for the chemical to take effect, in this test, the dogs will breathe the aerosol for 1 minute. Exposure began at 0900 hours. In numerous experiments, temporary paralysis has been produced in a variety of laboratory animals: mice, rats, guinea pigs, rabbits, cats, dogs, goats, and monkeys. After 1 minute, the dogs were removed from the exposure chamber. On animals, the effect of a small dose of CS4640 is similar to that of a very much larger dose of morphine. It paralyzes the skeletal muscles. Depending on the size of the dose in relation to the weight of the animal, the paralysis can be made to last from 1 to several hours. About 10 minutes after the chemical had taken full effect, the black dog was given an injection of an antidote. A couple of minutes later, the paralysis had disappeared and the black dog was normal again. Without treatment, the other dog remained paralyzed. The paralysis produced by the exposure to CS4640 for 1 minute lasted 1 hour, after which the brown dog recovered. This incapacitating chemical compound is still in the research stage, and no data are yet available as to its effects on humans. Against the effects of toxic chemicals, the protective mask has always been the most important piece of individual equipment. It fully protects the delicate respiratory tract. But there are several chemical agents which have a percutaneous effect. By absorption through the skin, they can cause casualties or even death. Nerve gases are so toxic that a very small amount of the liquid in contact with the skin can have a casualty effect. For these, the protective mask alone is not sufficient. The whole body must be protected with combat clothing which has been specially treated. After exposure to chemical attack, even though protective clothing and masks are worn, further precautionary action may be necessary to prevent casualties. For this purpose, an individual decontamination and treatment kit, E21, has been developed. A dusting bag contains a decontaminating chemical and a small capsule of agent-indicating dye. By crushing and kneading, the capsule is broken and the dye indicator is intimately mixed with the dusting powder. The decontaminating powder will neutralize small droplets and aerosols of nerve gas. At the same time, the presence of larger drops will be quickly revealed by a color change of the dye indicator. Small metal patches are provided to seal off these spots of gross contamination so as to prevent any possibility of the nerve gas penetrating through the clothing to the skin. The decontaminant is also applied to pieces of individual equipment to prevent secondary contamination which might result from handling the equipment. Blotting cloths are provided for removing any of the liquid agent which may have splashed on the skin. The affected skin area is then swabbed with a small bag of decontaminating material which has been moistened with water. The E21 kit can be used to decontaminate mustard as well as the nerve gases. It is scheduled to undergo final engineering tests in the fourth quarter of FY60. No change has been made in the method of impregnating outer garments of protective clothing, but the protective underwear has been vastly improved over the World War II type, which was uncomfortable to wear and often caused skin irritation. Developed in coordination with the Quartermaster Research and Development Center, it is a soft-textured, lightweight cotton fabric treated with Hycar and gives good protection against liquid toxic agents. Its protective property is not diminished by perspiration or laundering, and therefore does not require re-impregnation, as was the case with the older type. The newly standardized field protective mask, M17, is much improved over older types. Vision and voice transmission are better, and having no external canister, it is streamlined and more comfortable to wear. New special purpose masks have also been developed. For the helicopter pilot is the E75 mask, which provides unrestricted vision and is fitted with a special dynamic microphone for aircraft radio communication. Of similar design is a special mask for armored personnel with an added feature for the comfort and efficiency of the tank crew. Provision is made for connecting the individual's canister to a large central canister in the tank. While operating the tank, air is supplied under pressure from the large canister to the mask of each crew member, and breathing becomes effortless. A quick release connection permits the crew to bail out rapidly without loss of mask protection. Still another type of special mask has been developed for the casualty who is unable to wear his M17 mask because of head wounds. Bag-like in shape, it is made of filter material and equipped with clear plastic eyepieces. A gas-tight seal is formed by means of a drawstring which maintains moderate pressure around the neck. Thus, the patient is protected while being moved through a toxic atmosphere to an aid station or hospital.
Point source alarms have been developed to detect and automatically warn of the presence of nerve-type chemical agents, which, in vapor or aerosol form, are odorless and invisible. The larger model on the right has been adopted by the United States Navy for shipboard use. The smaller model is a later development which carries its own power source. These alarms continuously sample the atmosphere through a chemically treated paper. A concentration of toxic agent in the air well below the level required to cause casualties produces a color change on the paper. This is detected by a photoelectric cell activating the alarm system. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation is a newly developed technique of artificial respiration. In addition to medication, nerve gas casualties often may require aid in breathing. With one hand, the operator raises the patient's chin to open up his throat and upper airway. With the other hand, she holds his nose closed. Then she takes a deep breath and inflates his lungs, just like blowing up a balloon. The gauge at the upper right registers the percent oxygen saturation of the blood as measured by an ear oximeter. Note how it falls off when the worker stops the treatment. This patient is quite incapable of breathing by himself, and without artificial respiration, the oxygen saturation of his blood soon drops to a low level. When the treatment is resumed, the oximeter reading rapidly returns to normal. The basic scientific groundwork for mouth-to-mouth resuscitation was performed by the chemical warfare laboratories, and the clinical research was conducted under the auspices of the Army Medical Service at Baltimore City Hospital. It is expected that this method of artificial respiration will be adopted by the armed forces.